Benjamin Franklin, the founding father who shaped America and changed the world. Part 1. Colonial America before Benjamin Franklin. In the early 18th century, Britain's American colonies stretched along the Atlantic seaboard from Massachusetts to the Carolinas. These were not yet a unified nation, but rather a collection of separate territories governed under different charters, each maintaining its own laws, customs, and relationships with the British Crown. The population remained small and scattered, concentrated mostly in port cities like Boston, New York, and Charleston. Most colonists made their living through agriculture, though trade and commerce were beginning to flourish in the urban centers. The political structure rested on a delicate balance between colonial assemblies elected by property-owning white men and royal governors appointed by London. Across the Atlantic, Europe was experiencing the Enlightenment, an intellectual movement that emphasized reason, empirical observation, and the belief that human knowledge could improve society. Enlightenment thinkers challenged traditional authority and promoted scientific inquiry, individual rights, and rational government. These ideas traveled slowly to the colonies through books, pamphlets, and correspondence, carried primarily by educated merchants, clergy, and the small number of colonial elites who maintained connections with European intellectual circles. Printing technology played a crucial role in spreading information throughout the colonies. Printing presses, though expensive and rare, produced newspapers, religious tracts, government documents, and almanacs that reached far beyond the literate urban population. In an era before mass media, the printed word represented the primary means of public discourse and the formation of colonial identity. Relations between Britain and its American colonies remained generally peaceful during this period, though tensions simmered beneath the surface. The colonies operated under mercantilist policies designed to benefit British economic interests, and colonists increasingly chafed at trade restrictions and taxation without direct representation in Parliament. Into this world of expanding commerce, emerging literacy, and nascent political consciousness, Benjamin Franklin would be born in 1706, destined to become the most famous American of the 18th century. Sources used. The first American. The Life and Times of Benjamin Franklin by H.W. Brands, pages 318. Empire of Liberty. A History of the Early Republic by Gordon S. Wood, pages 1129. Benjamin Franklin. An American Life by Walter Isaacson, pages 1524. Part 2, Childhood, Apprenticeship and Rise as a Printer. Benjamin Franklin was born on January 17, 1706, in Boston, Massachusetts, the 15th child and youngest son of Josiah Franklin, a candle maker and soap boiler who had emigrated from England. The Franklin family lived modestly but respectably, maintaining the Puritan religious traditions that dominated Boston society. Josiah Franklin originally intended Benjamin for the clergy, but after only 2 years of formal schooling, all the education Franklin would ever receive in a classroom, financial constraints forced the boy to leave school at age 10. At 12, Benjamin became an apprentice to his older brother James, who operated a printing shop. The apprenticeship contract legally bound Franklin to serve until age 21 without wages, though his brother provided room, board, and training in the printer's trade. This arrangement proved both formative and frustrating. Franklin discovered a passion for reading, borrowing books from anyone who would lend them, and often staying up through the night to finish a volume before returning it the next morning. He taught himself to write by studying essays in The Spectator, a British periodical, copying them from memory, and then comparing his versions to the originals to identify weaknesses in his style. The relationship between the Franklin brothers deteriorated as James's newspaper, the New England Courant, ran into trouble with Boston authorities for its satirical content. When James was briefly imprisoned, 17-year-old Benjamin managed the paper. In 1723, after a particularly bitter dispute, Franklin broke his apprenticeship contract and fled Boston, a legally questionable action that would haunt him for years. Franklin arrived in Philadelphia in October 1723 with almost no money, famously walking up Market Street carrying 3 large puffy rolls, eating one while carrying the other 2 under his arms. This image, which Franklin himself recorded in his autobiography, became one of the most enduring symbols of American self-made success, though Franklin crafted the scene deliberately to emphasize his humble beginnings. After a brief and disappointing sojourn in London, where a promised benefactor failed to support him, Franklin returned to Philadelphia in 1726 and established himself as a printer. By 1730, Franklin had become the official printer for Pennsylvania and married Deborah Reed, a woman he had first met during his arrival in Philadelphia. Their common-law marriage, necessitated by legal complications surrounding Deborah's previous husband, lasted until her death in 1774. Franklin also acknowledged William, his illegitimate son born around 1730, to a mother whose identity remains unknown to historians. Franklin and Deborah raised William alongside their own children, Francis and Sarah. Franklin's business acumen transformed his printing operation into a commercial success. In 1729, he purchased the Pennsylvania Gazette, turning it into the colony's most successful newspaper through lively writing, local news coverage, and entertaining content. In 1732, he began publishing Poor Richard's Almanack under the pseudonym Richard Saunders, an annual publication filled with weather predictions, astronomical information, and pithy sayings that Franklin either collected or composed himself. Maxims like early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise, and a penny saved is a penny earned became embedded in American culture. Poor Richard's Almanack sold an average of 10,000 copies annually for 25 years, making it one of the colony's most popular publications, and establishing Franklin's reputation far beyond Philadelphia. *** Sources used. *** The Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, pages 2289. Benjamin Franklin, An American Life by Walter Isaacson, pages 2598. The First American. The Life and Times of Benjamin Franklin by H.W. Brands, pages 45-112. Benjamin Franklin by Edmund S. Morgan, pages 1547. Part 3. Scientist, inventor, and public reformer. By the 1740s, Franklin had achieved sufficient financial success to retire from active management of his printing business, though he retained ownership and profits. This semi-retirement at age 42 allowed him to pursue what he called philosophical interests, what we would today call scientific research. Franklin became particularly fascinated with electricity, a mysterious natural phenomenon that European scientists had begun to investigate through crude experiments with static charges and Leyden jars, devices that could store electrical charge. Between 1747 and 1752, Franklin conducted systematic experiments that revolutionized the understanding of electricity. He developed the theory that electricity consisted of a single fluid rather than 2 separate types, introducing the terms positive and negative to describe electrical charge. He demonstrated that lightning was electrical in nature, though the famous kite experiment requires careful historical examination. According to Franklin's own account, published in the Pennsylvania Gazette in October 1752, he flew a kite during a thunderstorm with a metal key attached to the string. When he touched the key, he observed sparks, proving that lightning carried electrical charge. Modern historians debate whether Franklin actually performed this dangerous experiment. The physicist and Franklin scholar Tom Tucker has noted that a direct lightning strike would almost certainly have killed Franklin, and that his description lacks the vivid detail found in his other experimental accounts. Most scholars now believe Franklin either conducted a more controlled experiment than popular legend suggests, or that he may have observed similar phenomena through other means. Regardless of the exact circumstances, Franklin's identification of lightning as electricity represented genuine scientific discovery, and his subsequent invention of the lightning rod provided practical protection that saved countless buildings from fire. Franklin invented the lightning rod in 1752, demonstrating that a grounded metal rod could safely conduct lightning's electrical charge into the earth. This invention spread rapidly throughout the colonies and Europe, marking one of the first times that scientific understanding directly produced a technology that protected human life and property. The lightning rod made Franklin internationally famous. The Royal Society of London, Britain's premier scientific organization, awarded him the Copley Medal in 1753 and elected him as a member in 1756. He received honorary degrees from universities including Harvard, Yale, and Oxford. Franklin's inventive mind produced other practical devices. Around 1741, he designed an iron furnace stove that radiated heat more efficiently than traditional fireplaces, though the Franklin stove, that became commercially successful, was actually a modification of his original design. In the 1760s, he invented bifocal glasses, grinding lenses that allowed him to see both near and far without switching spectacles. He also created the glass harmonica, a musical instrument consisting of rotating glass bowls that produced ethereal tones when touched with wet fingers. Mozart and Beethoven both composed music for the harmonica, and it enjoyed considerable popularity in Europe before falling out of favor. Equally important to Franklin's scientific work was his commitment to civic improvement. In 1731, he founded the Library Company of Philadelphia, the first subscription library in America, where members paid dues to maintain a shared collection of books. The library democratized access to knowledge, previously available only to wealthy individuals who could afford private collections. In 1736, Franklin organized the Union Fire Company, Philadelphia's first volunteer fire department, recognizing that cooperative fire prevention protected the entire community. Franklin helped establish what became the University of Pennsylvania in 1749, proposing an academy that emphasized practical subjects like mathematics, science, and modern languages, rather than the classical curriculum focused on Latin and Greek that dominated existing colleges. In 1751, he collaborated with Dr. Thomas Bond to found Pennsylvania Hospital, the first public hospital in the colonies. These institutions reflected Franklin's Enlightenment conviction that reason and cooperation could improve society, and his belief that successful individuals bore responsibility for the common good. Sources used. Benjamin Franklin. An American Life by Walter Isaacson. Pages 130–185, The First American. The Life and Times of Benjamin Franklin by H.W. Brands. Pages 164–208, The Papers of Benjamin Franklin. Yale edition. Volume 4. Pages 294–305, and Volume 5. Pages 63–88, Benjamin Franklin by Carl Van Doren. Pages 156–192, Part 4. Diplomat and revolutionary leader Franklin's entry into colonial politics came through his 1751 election to the Pennsylvania Assembly, where he served as a representative from Philadelphia. His first major diplomatic initiative occurred at the Albany Congress of 1754, a meeting of colonial representatives convened to coordinate defense against French and Native American threats. Franklin proposed the Albany Plan of Union, which would have created a unified colonial government with the power to levy taxes, raise armies, and regulate relations with native peoples. Though neither the colonial assemblies nor the British government accepted the plan, it represented the first serious proposal for colonial confederation and anticipated the structure that would eventually emerge after independence. The relationship between Britain and its American colonies deteriorated dramatically following the 7 Years' War, which concluded in 1763. Britain had accumulated enormous war debts and expected the colonies to help pay for their own defense. Parliament passed the Sugar Act in 1764 and the Stamp Act in 1765, imposing taxes on colonial commerce and printed materials without colonial consent. Colonial resistance erupted immediately. The Stamp Act particularly affected Franklin's profession, as it required tax stamps on newspapers, pamphlets, legal documents, and even playing cards. Franklin was serving in London as Pennsylvania's colonial agent when the Stamp Act passed. Initially, he misjudged the intensity of colonial opposition and suggested a friend for the position of stamp distributor in Philadelphia, a decision that damaged his reputation when angry colonists threatened his house and family. Franklin quickly recognized his error and became a leading advocate for the Stamp Act's repeal. In February 1766, he testified before Parliament in a masterful performance that lasted 4 hours, answering questions about colonial attitudes and explaining why the colonists rejected Parliament's authority to tax them without representation. His testimony helped convince Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act, though Britain maintained its theoretical right to tax the colonies. Franklin remained in London until 1775, working to reconcile colonial and British interests even as the Gulf widened. He witnessed the growing crisis with increasing frustration, eventually concluding that Britain would never treat the colonies as equal partners within the empire. In 1774, the British government publicly humiliated him before the Privy Council for his role in leaking letters written by Massachusetts Governor Thomas Hutchinson. Franklin stood silent during an hour-long verbal assault, maintaining his composure while officials denounced him as a thief and a troublemaker. This experience transformed Franklin from a loyal British subject hopping for reconciliation into a committed advocate for American independence. Franklin returned to Philadelphia in May 1775, arriving just weeks after the battles of Lexington and Concord had begun the Revolutionary War. The Pennsylvania Assembly immediately elected him as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress. Despite being the oldest member at 69, Franklin served on numerous committees, including the committee that drafted the Declaration of Independence. Though Thomas Jefferson wrote the document's famous prose, Franklin contributed several memorable edits, including changing Jefferson's phrase, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable," to the more direct, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." Franklin's most crucial contribution to American independence came through his diplomatic mission to France, where he arrived in December 1776. The Continental Army had suffered devastating defeats around New York, and the Revolution's survival depended on securing foreign support. France, eager to weaken Britain after losing the 7 Years' War, represented America's best hope for the military and financial assistance necessary to sustain the war effort. Franklin's scientific reputation preceded him to Paris, where he was already celebrated as the inventor of the lightning rod. He cultivated an image as the virtuous American philosopher, wearing simple brown clothes and a fur cap that French aristocrats found charmingly rustic. This carefully constructed persona masked sophisticated diplomatic skill. Franklin navigated the complex court of Louis XVI, befriended influential French intellectuals, and patiently built support for an alliance while managing the difficult personalities of his fellow American commissioners, particularly Arthur Lee, who suspected Franklin of betraying American secrets. Franklin's diplomacy achieved its greatest success with the Treaty of Alliance signed in February 1778, through which France formally recognized American independence and committed military forces to the war. French naval power and troops proved decisive, particularly at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, where French ships prevented British evacuation while a combined Franco-American army forced General Cornwallis to surrender. Franklin remained in Paris to negotiate the peace treaty that would end the war. Working alongside John Adams and John Jay, Franklin helped secure the Treaty of Paris of 1783, which granted the United States independence and remarkably generous territorial boundaries, extending to the Mississippi River. Franklin's willingness to negotiate separately with Britain rather than coordinate every move with France angered the French government, but produced more favorable terms for America. At 77, Franklin had secured the diplomatic triumphs that transformed 13 rebellious colonies into a recognized nation. Sources used. The First American. The Life and Times of Benjamin Franklin by H.W. Brands. Pages 280–522. Benjamin Franklin. An American Life by Walter Isaacson. Pages 221–398. The Americanization of Benjamin Franklin by Gordon S. Wood. Pages 125–203. The Papers of Benjamin Franklin. Yale edition, Volume 22. Pages 500–538 and Volume 29. Pages 678–701 Part 5. The Constitution, Final Years. And Personal Beliefs. Franklin returned to Philadelphia in September 1785 after 9 years in France, receiving a hero's welcome. Despite his advanced age and declining health, he suffered from gout and bladder stones that made movement increasingly painful. Pennsylvanians elected him president of the state's executive council, a position he held for 3 years. In 1787, Pennsylvania's legislature selected the 81-year-old Franklin as a delegate to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. The Constitutional Convention, which met from May to September 1787, brought together 55 delegates to design a new framework of government to replace the failing Articles of Confederation. Franklin was by far the oldest delegate and often too ill to speak at length, occasionally having his remarks read by fellow Pennsylvania delegate James Wilson. Despite his physical limitations, Franklin played a crucial role as a voice for compromise during the heated debates that threatened to destroy the convention. The most serious conflict arose between large and small states over representation in the new Congress. Large states wanted representation based on population, while small states demanded equal representation regardless of size. As delegates reached an impasse, Franklin proposed a compromise: a bicameral legislature with proportional representation in the House of Representatives and equal representation in the Senate. Though Franklin did not originate all elements of what became known as the Great Compromise, his prestige and advocacy helped persuade delegates to accept it. Franklin's most famous contribution to the convention came on the final day, September 17, 1787, when he urged unanimous support for the Constitution despite delegates' various reservations. James Madison recorded Franklin's speech, which acknowledged that he did not approve of all parts of the document but supported it because "I expect no better, and because I am not sure that it is not the best." Franklin appealed to delegates' humility, suggesting they might be wrong in their objections just as he might be wrong in his approvals. His speech convinced several wavering delegates to sign, though some still refused. Franklin's religious views evolved throughout his life and remained complex. Raised in Puritan Boston, he abandoned Orthodox Christianity as a young man, embracing deism, the belief that God created the universe but did not intervene in human affairs. Franklin attended various churches throughout his life, but rejected core Christian doctrines like the divinity of Jesus and the resurrection. In a letter written just weeks before his death to Ezra Stiles, president of Yale, Franklin wrote that while he had some doubts about Jesus' divinity, he had no objection to its being believed by others if belief made them better people. This pragmatic approach to religion typified Franklin's Enlightenment philosophy, which valued religion primarily for promoting moral behavior rather than theological truth. Franklin's position on slavery represents one of the most significant evolutions in his thinking. Like many wealthy colonists, Franklin owned enslaved people for much of his life, including at least 6 individuals whose names appear in historical records. His newspaper printed advertisements for slave sales and rewards for captured fugitives. However, Franklin's views changed dramatically in his final years. In 1787, he became president of the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery, one of America's first abolitionist organizations. In February 1790, just weeks before his death, Franklin signed a petition to Congress calling for the abolition of slavery and the end of the slave trade. His final published essay, written under a pseudonym, satirized the arguments of slavery's defenders by comparing them to a fictional Algerian official justifying the enslavement of Christians. Modern historians have debated how to interpret Franklin's late-life abolitionism. Some scholars, including David Waldstreicher, argue that Franklin's anti-slavery activities came too late to erase his decades of participation in and profit from slavery. Others, like Gordon S. Wood, emphasize the significance of Franklin's willingness to change his views despite his age and previous complicity. Most historians agree that while Franklin deserves credit for eventually opposing slavery, his evolution on the issue cannot excuse his earlier involvement in the institution. Franklin spent his final years revising his autobiography, which he had begun in 1771 but never completed. The work ends in 1757, covering less than half his life, but it became one of the most influential books in American literature, establishing the template for the American success story. The self-made individual who rises through hard work, self-improvement, and service to others. Franklin died on April 17, 1790, at age 84. 20,000 people attended his funeral in Philadelphia, the largest public gathering the city had ever seen. Congress ordered a month of mourning, and France's National Assembly declared 3 days of national mourning, an unprecedented honor for a foreign citizen. Franklin left an estate worth approximately £30,000, substantial but not enormous by the standards of wealthy Americans. His will included provisions for public works in Boston and Philadelphia, establishing funds to provide loans to young tradesmen, demonstrating his commitment to civic improvement even after death. Sources used. Benjamin Franklin. An American Life by Walter Isaacson. Pages 435–478. The Americanization of Benjamin Franklin by Gordon S. Wood. Pages 204–232. The Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. Pages 148. Runaway America. Benjamin Franklin, Slavery, and the American Revolution by David Waldstreicher. Pages 218–237. The Papers of Benjamin Franklin, Yale edition, Volume 43, pages 538–542 Part 6. Franklin's ideas and lasting influence. Franklin's influence extended across multiple fields, embodying the Enlightenment ideal of the learned generalist who mastered diverse subjects through reason and observation. His electrical experiments fundamentally advanced scientific understanding of a natural phenomenon, introducing terminology and concepts that remain in use today. The single fluid theory of electricity, the identification of positive and negative charges, and the experimental method Franklin employed influenced subsequent researchers including Alessandro Volta and Michael Faraday. His election to the Royal Society and the French Academy of Sciences confirmed his status among Europe's leading natural philosophers. In education, Franklin challenged the classical curriculum that dominated 18th-century learning. His proposal for the academy that became the University of Pennsylvania emphasized practical knowledge, mathematics, science, modern languages, and useful trades, rather than Latin and Greek. This approach anticipated the land-grant universities and technical colleges that would emerge in 19th-century America, institutions designed to serve democratic society rather than reproduce aristocratic culture. Franklin's journalism helped establish the American newspaper as a vehicle for entertainment, political discourse, and commercial information. The Pennsylvania Gazette demonstrated that colonial printing could be profitable while maintaining editorial independence, setting a precedent for the free press that would become central to American democracy. Poor Richard's Almanack reached ordinary colonists who might own only a handful of printed materials, spreading Enlightenment values of thrift, industry, and self-improvement to audiences far beyond the educated elite. His diplomatic achievements proved equally consequential. The French alliance that Franklin negotiated provided the military support without which American independence would likely have failed. The Treaty of Paris secured territorial boundaries that gave the infant United States room to expand westward, fundamentally shaping the nation's future development. Franklin's diplomatic style, patient, pragmatic, willing to compromise while maintaining core principles, established an approach to international relations that later American diplomats would emulate. Economically, Franklin promoted a vision of prosperity based on industry, free trade, and investment in infrastructure. He opposed mercantilist policies that restricted colonial commerce and advocated for paper currency when hard money shortages threatened to strangle economic growth. His writings on population growth and economic development, particularly observations concerning the increase of mankind, influenced later thinkers including Thomas Malthus. Franklin's philosophy of self-improvement became deeply embedded in American culture. His autobiography presented a life story structured around systematic moral development, describing how young Benjamin Franklin identified 13 virtues, including temperance, industry, and humility, and methodically practiced each one. This approach reflected Enlightenment confidence in human perfectibility through reason and discipline. Whether or not Franklin actually followed his virtue charts as rigorously as he claimed, the autobiography offered readers a template for self-directed improvement that required neither inherited status nor formal education. His commitment to civic institutions demonstrated Enlightenment principles applied to practical governance. The organizations Franklin founded, libraries, fire companies, learned societies, hospitals, showed how voluntary cooperation among citizens could provide public goods and improve community welfare. This vision of civil society, operating between individual families and government authority, became central to American civic culture. Franklin's influence extended beyond America. French intellectuals embraced him as the embodiment of Enlightenment ideals, the philosopher-statesman who proved that republican government and scientific progress could flourish together. His electrical discoveries established that important scientific work need not come exclusively from European universities and royal academies. Colonial Americans could contribute original knowledge to universal human understanding. Sources used. Benjamin Franklin. An American Life by Walter Isaacson. Pages 479–491. The Americanization of Benjamin Franklin by Gordon S. Wood. Pages 235–248. Benjamin Franklin by Edmund S. Morgan. Pages 308–327. The First American. The Life and Times of Benjamin Franklin by H. W. Brands. Pages 690–712. Part 7. Legacy and Historical Importance Among the Founding Generation. Franklin stands unique. George Washington commanded the Continental Army and served as first president, establishing the executive branch's dignity and restraint. Thomas Jefferson authored the Declaration of Independence and expanded the nation through the Louisiana Purchase. James Madison designed much of the Constitution's structure and defended it in the Federalist Papers. Alexander Hamilton created the financial system that gave the federal government credibility. Yet only Franklin participated significantly in all the major events that created the United States, signing the Declaration of Independence, negotiating the crucial French alliance, making peace with Britain, and helping write the Constitution. Franklin's scientific achievements secured him international recognition before the Revolution began, providing credibility that proved invaluable in European diplomacy. When he arrived in France seeking an alliance, he came not as a representative of an unknown rebellion, but as the famous Dr. Franklin, the man who had tamed lightning. This scientific reputation opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed to envoys from rebellious colonies. His influence on democratic thought helped shape American political culture. Franklin demonstrated that leadership could come from merit rather than birth, that common people possessed the capacity for self-government, and that society improved when individuals collaborated for the public good. These beliefs, embodied in Franklin's life story, challenged aristocratic assumptions about social hierarchy and natural inequality. Modern historical scholarship has complicated earlier portrayals of Franklin as the simple, cheerful sage represented in popular mythology. Historians now emphasize the contradictions in Franklin's life: a champion of liberty who owned slaves for decades, an advocate of virtue who had affairs and fathered an illegitimate child, a prophet of American values who spent most of his adult life in Britain and France, a self-made man whose success depended partly on fortunate connections and patronage. Gordon S. Wood's scholarship has particularly influenced contemporary understanding of Franklin by exploring how he changed throughout his life in response to different contexts. Wood argues that Franklin was not born embodying American values, but rather came to represent them through a process of adaptation and reinvention. The Franklin who died in 1790 held views quite different from the young printer of 1730, having evolved through experience rather than maintaining fixed principles throughout his life. The debate over Franklin's position on slavery reflects broader questions about how to evaluate historical figures who held views we now consider morally wrong. Some historians emphasize that Franklin eventually opposed slavery and should receive credit for changing his mind. Others argue that his late-life conversion cannot excuse his decades of profiting from enslaved labor. Most scholars agree that both aspects of Franklin's relationship to slavery, his complicity and his eventual opposition, deserve attention in any complete historical account. Franklin's image appears on the $100 bill, making his face one of the most widely circulated in American currency despite his never serving as president. Countless schools, towns, counties, and institutions bear his name. The Benjamin Franklin Institute in Philadelphia preserves his legacy, while his papers continue to be published by Yale University Press in a scholarly edition begun in 1959 and still ongoing, testament to the volume and significance of his written output. International recognition of Franklin remains substantial. France honors him as a key figure in Franco-American relations, and the French Enlightenment claims him as one of their own. Britain, despite its colonial conflict with Franklin, recognizes his scientific contributions and role in Anglo-American rapprochement after independence. He represents one of the few historical figures equally admired across different national traditions. Historians continue to debate Franklin's ultimate significance. Some scholars, emphasizing his scientific achievements, rank him among the 18th century's leading natural philosophers. Others focus on his diplomatic triumphs, arguing that his negotiation of the French alliance and the Treaty of Paris represent American diplomacy's finest achievements. Still others highlight his role in shaping American identity, presenting a vision of the New World as a place where talent and industry mattered more than birth and inheritance. What remains undisputed is Franklin's extraordinary range. Few individuals in history have achieved distinction in such diverse fields: science, literature, politics, diplomacy, business, and civic organization. He published significant works of political philosophy and popular humor. He made fundamental contributions to electrical science and invented practical devices that improved daily life. He helped design a new nation's government and secured the foreign alliance that made its independence possible. He rose from genuine poverty to international fame through intelligence, industry, and adaptation to changing circumstances. Benjamin Franklin died before seeing how the republic he helped create would develop, spared the partisan conflicts that would embitter his fellow founders in the 1790s. His optimism about human progress through reason and cooperation reflected Enlightenment confidence that the next generation of historians would question. but that gave the revolutionary generation courage to attempt their unprecedented experiment in self-government. In both his achievements and contradictions, Franklin embodied the promise and complexity of American democracy, the belief that ordinary people possessed extraordinary potential, tempered by the recognition that even the wisest individuals remained flawed and limited by their circumstances. This combination of aspiration and acknowledgement of human limitation may constitute Franklin's most enduring legacy to the nation he helped create and the world he helped transform. Sources used. The Americanization of Benjamin Franklin by Gordon S. Wood, pages 226–248. Benjamin Franklin. An American Life by Walter Isaacson, pages 489–500. Benjamin Franklin by Carl Van Doren, pages 773–788. The First American. The Life and Times of Benjamin Franklin by H. W. Brands, pages 723–738. Runaway America. Benjamin Franklin, Slavery, and the American Revolution by David Waldstreicher, pages 240–258.